Welcome to the fifth of my deconstructions of Jordan Peterson's 2017 biblical series. In this episode, I will delve into Peterson's insincerity surrounding Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment and Atheists, which he cites repeatedly in several of his talks. For Peterson, the fictional world of the main character serves as a stark warning on the dangers of abandoning Christian values.
Because what happens in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is that the main character, whose name is Raskolnikov, decides that there's no intrinsic value to other people, and that as a consequence, he can do whatever he wants. It's only cowardice that stops him from acting, right? Because why would it be anything else if the value of other people is just an arbitrary superstition? Then why can't I do exactly what I want when I want, which is the psychopath's viewpoint? And Crime and Punishment is the best investigation I know of what happens if you take the notion that there's nothing divine about the individual seriously. Now, you know, most of the people I know who are deeply atheistic, and I understand why they're deeply atheistic, they haven't contended with people like Dostoevsky, not as far as I can tell, because I don't see logical flaws in Crime and Punishment.
He claims he doesn't see any logical flaws, or, more appropriately, he doesn't want to see the blindingly obvious ones that refute his biased narrative. Further, in the unbelievable segment, fellow psychologist Susan Blackmore spotted the flaw immediately and rightly refuted. That doesn't have to be true. That's a character in a novel. I don't think that that's so. It might be considered impolite, if not downright unchristian of me, to point out to Peterson that atheists, 1, merely have a lack of belief in the existence of divine entities, 2, they don't advocate that other people have no intrinsic value, as far as I know, an argument from ignorance to be sure. But I'll stick my neck out on this one that Peterson is spewing irrational hysteria on this point. And 3, that people can do whatever they want, whenever they want. As Peterson, a trained clinical psychologist who should know better, points out, believing that other people have no value is the psychopath's viewpoint. It is begging the question, is he seriously equating psychopathy with atheism? For Peterson to redefine atheism to suit his narrow agenda, that atheists are people who contend there's nothing divine about the individual, is both misleading and wholly inappropriate. Or, as he stated in the talk with Matt Dillahunty, atheists think they are godless, but act out the principles of belief, which is just more of his invented notions. Further, considering that atheists tend to be vocal advocates against religious privilege and supporters of universal secular human rights, on what rational basis does he conflate atheists with psychopaths? This is a harmful narrative given the common prejudices surrounding atheists, and it is professionally irresponsible for a clinical psychologist and professor to be spouting this idiotic nonsense. And what makes Peterson think he can get away with such a ridiculous claim in the first place? Oh, because he's employing that old salesman trick, the bait and switch regarding his claims about Dostoevsky's characterization. On the list of logical fallacies, where does appeal to a fictional character fall? This is right up there with the evangelical appeal to the Flintstones in refuting evolution. Given that, 1, Dostoevsky was a devout Christian of the Russian Orthodox Church, which he considered to be the only denomination with the true interpretation. 2, he believed in Christian socialism, writing, "If everyone were actively Christian, not a single social question would come up." And 3, Crime and Punishment, and his other works, were blatant overtures pleading Christianity as the only bastion of moral values which would save society. Point 2 alone, that not a single social question would come up. If the world would just be actively Christian, is so patently insipid and which should be obvious to Peterson, but which he, characteristically, carefully avoids as inconvenient to his sky-is-falling warnings about secularism and rising atheism. Where is Freud when we need him? Therefore, it is rather disingenuous of Peterson to hype this book while burying the lead that it is precisely the Christian propaganda that it was clearly written to be. That Dostoevsky plumbed profound psychological depths, years before Freud, is not in question, but citing his thinking as an example of a legitimate case of what happens when religious values are abandoned hardly rises to the level of intellectual integrity one would expect of someone with Peterson's education and experience. It is exactly the point that Raskolnikov is a psychopath that makes him discount human life and commit murder, not that he was an atheist. For Peterson to overlook the deep neuroses of the character and fail to attribute the behavior to the underlying psychological issues rather than to atheism is troubling, but it makes sense from the perspective that it does not serve Peterson's blatant, agenda-driven motivation to promote, like Dostoevsky, the merits of Christian values. If you like my content, please like and subscribe to get notified of new videos. Please also consider supporting my work by becoming a Patreon sponsor. You can also find me on the following platforms: